You pay their salaries even though they're not showing up for work. We found dozens of recent cases of no-show federal government employees. As Scott McFarland and the News 4 I-team show us now, those civil servants were far from the office while on the taxpayers' dime.
Some of them went golfing or gambling or just gallivanting around town while on the clock. Valentina Pierce admitted doctoring her timesheet to play hooky from her job at the Environmental Protection Agency for a total of 5 full work weeks.
I'm Scott McFarland with Channel 4.
It went on for 2 years, costing taxpayers $15,000 for work she never did, before the feds caught on and prosecuted her for fraud.
We would like you to stop it.
John Beal, a high-ranking EPA official, executed a bigger scheme, pretending to be a CIA agent as a way to get permission for an extra paid day off work each week. About 13 years passed before investigators discovered Beal didn't work for the CIA and that he'd burned taxpayers for hundreds of thousands of dollars in free vacation time. His work emails obtained by the News 4 I-team show his CIA scheme. He tells colleagues, "I'm off to points unstated, just leaving Langley." Alan Williams investigates these cases for the EPA's Office of Inspector General.
This isn't as rare as we think it is.
No, it's not rare. It's not rare. I like to say here at EPA, I think it's just a fraction, a small percentage. But again, I don't know what I don't know.
Internal government audits obtained by the News 4 I-team reveal in the past 3 years, more than 60 workers across the federal government have doctored their timesheets to sneak out of work while on the clock.
And our review found this happening at federal agencies throughout our city, not just the EPA, but also at the Pentagon. About a half dozen cases at the Department of Transportation, at the Labor Department, the Smithsonian, NASA. And all told, we found this costing taxpayers about $1 million just since 2012.
A jury convicted Herman Ransom, a top official with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, of theft for going to the casino while on the clock. At the General Services Administration, a D.C.-based worker worked on his swing at a local golf course, bragging in an email, "Everyone's in," and he said he was using slick leave to get out of office. Williams says government managers should be cracking down on these no-show workers.
Had the manager or the timekeeper did their due diligence, then they could have, prevented this from going further.
But that wouldn't have stopped Valentina Pierce. Why? Because she was the timekeeper at the EPA. Pierce managed her office's timesheets, and prosecutors said she figured out a way to doctor them.
The agency isn't going to police themselves. That's why they need an internal watchdog, and that's the Inspector General.
But David Williams of the Taxpayers Protection Alliance says many of those inspectors general are underfunded. The I-team's review found nearly every major federal government inspector general recently instituted hiring freezes or reductions in training or travel because of tight budgets, even though those offices save money by reducing fraud.
$1 spent with the Inspector General, they can save upwards of $12 to $20.
In the meantime, most hard-working civil servants risk getting a bad rap.
I still think, maybe we just touched the tip of the iceberg.
Because of those gambling and golfing workers goofing off on the clock. Scott McFarland, News 4 I-team.
Valentina Pierce agreed to reimburse the federal government. John Beal is serving a 2.5-year sentence in a federal prison.
Men and women who serve their country in the military, but the question is whether their government is serving them.
An investigation by the News 4 I-team reveals problems for some military parents. As Scott McFarland reports now, there are growing complaints and major backlogs in a program that's supposed to help provide daycare for Army children.
Finding the right daycare can be stressful and expensive.
Absolutely.
But U.S. Army Captain Carmen Dykes of Laurel said she never thought placing her 2-year-old in daycare would be this stressful or this expensive.
I wake up thinking about it. I go to bed thinking about it.
The daycare at her Army post is filled, so she's one of thousands of U.S. Army parents nationwide who use the Army Fee Assistance Program, a federal program that allows Army parents to use pricier private daycare outside the post and provides money to help the families pay for it. But Dyke says there's a problem. The Army Fee Assistance Program doesn't always pay its bills on time, that they're months late on her payments. The money from the government isn't coming, so you've had to front it?
Yes. They'll be 3 months behind, and so we'll have to catch our daycare provider up 3 months, and which puts us out at, a big chunk of money.
Like, this is a problem.
Kayla Hensley says her payments from the program were 5 months late and that she nearly went broke.
We were pinching penny to penny every single month.
Because you're fronting money for the government.
Yes.
An agency called the General Services Administration has run the Army Fee Assistance Program for 12 years. We found the trouble began in recent months when the Army asked the agency to expand the program. Last year, they had just hundreds of families involved. Now they have about 10,000, and there have been enormous growing pains. Internal agency records show a backlog of 11,500 unreturned calls, emails, and records requests from those families, an unmanageable backlog, according to the General Services Administration's internal auditor.
We're very concerned about the backlog for the families. We're very concerned about the impact to the families.
The agency added contractors to help handle the flood of calls and new families. But in the meantime, the I-Team has learned more than 30 Army families have filed formal complaints with federal investigators about the red tape. One of those complaints we obtained reads, "I've sent many emails and made many phone calls and there have been no solutions." Another reads, "It seems the GSA is way over its head trying to manage this program." The General Services Administration declined requests for an interview, but in a statement acknowledged challenges in the program. A spokeswoman said the application process for this daycare program is complex and that some families have submitted paperwork without all the necessary information. And she says Army families often move or change assignments, which the agency says complicates matters. But they wouldn't answer why these moms have suffered delays.
Does this make the prospect of having a second child more challenging?
Oh, absolutely. There is no way that we could ever afford to have a second child.
The General Services Administration tells us it's adding staff and redesigning the program website and trying to simplify how payments are handled to make it easier for these parents. But Jim and Doreen, they didn't give a firm timetable as to when they'll do so.
So what they're saying is they're just overwhelmed? Is that basically their answer to why these problems exist?
The backlog of calls, emails, and records requests is 11,500 right now, and all indications are that backlog is going to grow further.
But they will get paid eventually.
Retroactively, they'll get their money back once the government catches up.
But rough, because child care is one of the biggest expenses in a family's budget.
If you haven't budgeted for $400 extra a week, it's going to hurt fast.
All right,
Big
indeed.
trouble.
Thank you, Scott.
Scott.
They're fueling up. You're paying the tab. Tonight, the NEWS4 I-Team is exposing government workers illegally swiping government credit cards to buy gasoline for themselves. The I-Team, Scott McFarland, shows how a growing number of employees are pulling it off and the special team of federal agents trying to catch them doing it.
We caught up with Terrell McCrae as he left the D.C. courthouse.
Hey, Mr. McCrae.
But he didn't want to talk, shielding his face and then hustling back toward the doors.
Mr. McCrae, I'm Scott with Channel 4.
When we tried to ask about his recent arrest and the case that landed him in court, this is the response we got.
Can you tell us anything about these gasoline thefts?
McCrae is a staff assistant with the D.C. Fire Department, who investigators say illegally used his federal government-issued purchase card to buy more than $2,600 in gasoline for his own personal use, just since August, at several gas stations in Northwest D.C., including this BP station on Rhode Island Avenue. Some of the gas, according to court records, McCrae used in his personal Jaguar, and some of the gas he's accused of selling to other people for 50 cents on the dollar. And Terrell McCrae isn't the only person recently arrested for this. Lanier White is another. You're watching surveillance video obtained by the NEWS4 I-Team. Investigators say it shows White illegally filling someone else's car with a government gas card he'd taken from the Fort Monroe military base in Virginia. White was convicted of conspiracy to steal more than $250,000 of taxpayer-funded gas along with an associate and is currently serving time in a federal prison.
They're all over the country. They're everywhere where the government does business and needs automobiles and transportation to get places.
Bob Erickson is the acting inspector general of the General Services Administration, which oversees a massive fleet, tens of thousands of government cars.
Sometimes it's just somebody that decides they're not getting paid enough and they want to get a bonus by using the government credit card.
The NEWS4 I-Team's review of federal records reveals government workers have stolen more than $2.4 million in taxpayer-funded gasoline since 2010. More than 260 different gas theft cases nationwide. Though these fleet cards require workers to enter the odometer readings from their government cars and their government tag numbers to prevent theft, cases reviewed by the I-Team show employees can and have falsified that information.
Generally, we don't catch them on the first tank. They've been doing it for a little bit.
Special Agent Eric Radwick of the GSA's Inspector General's office and his team have nabbed several government gas thieves. Radwick's team goes undercover, doing surveillance at gas stations in which suspected government crooks frequently fill their tanks. He also reviews a confidential database which shows every time a federal worker swipes a government gas card.
It may have been a weak excuse, but one of the excuses that people get all the time when they misuse a fleet card, a travel card, a purchase card. I pulled it out. I didn't realize it till after it was done because I thought, it's right next to my regular ones.
But you can see how different an official government fleet card looks from your typical credit card. As for Terrell McRae, his court proceedings are ongoing. He's charged with fraud, and the fire department has put him on paid administrative leave. Prosecutors say he's pleaded not guilty.
Eliminating gas theft altogether could be impossible for the feds. We asked how many of these cards have been distributed to federal workers, and we found the answer is 590,000. Scott McFarland, News 4 IT.
Terrell McRae isn't the only D.C. fire worker accused of using a government card to steal gas. So too is a high-ranking agency inspector.